Morning. Welcome to the U.S. Center. And welcome to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's event this morning, leveraging partnerships to scale up climate-smart solutions for agriculture, forestry, and rural communities. My name is Sean Babington. I'm the Senior Advisor for Climate Change in the Office of the Secretary at USDA. And I'm very grateful, but really excited to be here to share the details of several of the lines of effort that we have going on at the U.S. Department of Agriculture with the goal of driving much greater adoption of climate-smart practices all across the landscape. We're particularly excited to share a lot of these lessons that we're going to hear from the Secretary and our distinguished panel on with a global audience here at COP28. To begin our program, we're going to hear remarks from the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. He's going to outline several of the aspects of the work that we're doing at the department and really set the table for a panel discussion where we go from conceptual to what's going on in reality and on the ground. Following the Secretary's remarks, we'll have three distinguished panelists come up. We'll have a dialogue amongst the group to really get into the details of what this looks like when we go from concept to reality. After about an hour or so, I'll wrap things up, and we will look forward to transitioning to the next program here. But to get us started, I want to go ahead and welcome the leader of what we call stateside the People's Department, Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack.
Sean, thank you very, very much. This is an historic day because for the first time in a COP meeting, we have a day that's dedicated to food and agriculture. And I think it's important to acknowledge the UAE's leadership and particularly Minister Al-Mahari's leadership in making this day specifically possible. So it's great to be with all of you today. And this is an important topic, and one that I think you'll find to be informative and enlightening and hopeful. Over the past 60 years, American agriculture has responded to the call that was created in the 1970s or so for the focus on greater productivity to meet the needs of the United States and of the world. But this has led, as we know, to larger farms and fewer farmers. And in fact, at the time this process was launched in the 1970s, then Secretary of Agriculture Earl Butz suggested that essentially it was going to be a circumstance where people needed either to get big and expand or they might have to leave the farming operation. And unfortunately, that left small and mid-sized farms behind, which in turn has weakened rural economies and has threatened, in my view, our food security. And I think we found that out during the course of the pandemic, that while we had an incredibly efficient system, we didn't have a resilient one. So at USDA, we felt that it was time that we created a system that works for everyone in farming, that starts by creating value and opportunity for all producers and for the communities in which they live. And we believe we can do this in large part through a climate-smart agricultural approach. The key, we believe, is creating multiple income streams that can achieve multiple goals. Farmers can earn extra income by taking on innovative climate-smart practices, capitalizing on the bioeconomy, while also creating for their communities better-paying jobs. We can do this by supporting climate-smart commodity markets, bio-preferred markets, biofuel markets, ecosystem service markets, on-farm energy production, and more. These represent opportunities for farmers and forested landowners to achieve success for their rural economy and also for our planet. We're working to establish this model by collaborating with farmers and ranchers and producers and partners, and through our investments to create an economy that supports rural communities, while at the same time meeting the global demand for renewable and climate-smart goods and also achieves our climate results. The United States agriculture and forestry sectors have made incredible progress on tackling climate change over the past few years. And we would not be there without the support of many partners, some of which we'll hear from today. Last year, I announced that USDA would invest nearly $3 billion in 141 partnerships for climate-smart commodities. Just at midnight, we had the field of market contract signed, which is a major achievement and one of the 141 projects that we're proud of. Now, we've executed these projects and we're rapidly implementing their plans to create new markets for climate-smart commodities. We have more than 130 projects already underway, representing every U.S. state and several territories, and encompassing more than 90 commodities, incorporating up to 170 climate-smart practices. We've held 4 meetings this year with representatives of each project, setting the stage to learn more about the investments that will be made, to understand what works and what doesn't, and critically, how these markets can benefit farmers and forested landowners. The projected outcomes for these investments are massive. Once fully implemented, we estimate that more than 60,000 farms will be reached, encompassing more than 25 million acres of working lands engaged in climate-smart production practices, like cover crops, no-till, nutrient management, as well as pasture and forestry management. These actions are estimated to mitigate more than 60 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which would be the same as removing more than 12 million gas-powered passenger vehicles from the road for a year. Now, we've specifically designed this opportunity to appeal to all types of farmers, from large farms to small family farm operations, across all major commodities, including a diverse range of farmer demographics. The project involves nearly 100 universities, including over 30 minority serving institutions. The wide range of partnerships will bring new ideas and innovative skills in monitoring and outreach, including historic black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, and over 20 tribes and tribal groups, touching a wide geography within the U.S. The goal is simple: create more opportunities for farmers, ranchers, producers, and forested landowners to implement climate-smart practices by leveraging markets for their value-added goods. In other words, creating a market incentive to produce these products. But these aren't the only investments we're making. The Inflation Reduction Act provides critical resources to also assist farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners in adopting climate-smart practices. Through this act, we're investing $19.5 billion over 5 years to support USDA's conservation programs that will also yield climate change mitigation benefits. And implementation began in 2023. Over the past year, the Natural Resource Conservation Service invested $850 million for our flagship conservation programs, a record number. These investments mean more producers will have access to critical conservation and technical assistance. And we all know that the demand for climate-smart practices is there, and this is going to help us meet that demand. Credibility, I think, is important to this process, and it underscores our approach. For any of this work, we must ensure that climate-smart practices will implement in a way to generate real income and real outcomes. To that end, we're also investing $300 million to measure, evaluate, and quantify carbon sequestration and greenhouse gas emission reductions from these conservation investments. These funds will support a comprehensive strategy to improve data models and tools needed to accurately quantify the impact of climate-smart activities. We have to know what works and what doesn't. They'll establish a soil carbon monitoring network to improve our understanding of the impact of these practices on soil carbon stock and how it changes over time. Now, the progress we're making domestically will also have international benefits. Through the International Climate Hub, which was established through our Aim for Climate initiative, it's a virtual platform, and we're going to translate what we measure, what we monitor, what we report, and what we verify. We're going to translate those learnings from American agriculture to the rest of the world. Now, this will help us create for the rest of the world appropriate tools that can be used by farmers everywhere. We're working to provide these user-friendly tools like Comet Global to make it easier to quantify the benefits of climate-smart agriculture around the world. And I encourage you all to take a look at that International Climate Hub because it's really pretty significant what we're currently doing. The findings from our partnerships for climate-smart commodity projects can help develop global markets for climate-smart goods. The learnings from these projects will be available to farmers, not only to farmers involved in the projects and the American public, but as I said, to farmers around the world and to our international partners to learn from us and better inform decisions that they make as going forward. The bottom line is this: through investments and the work of American farmers and forested landowners, we can position agriculture and forestry as leaders in tackling climate change. The findings of our current efforts will inform both domestic and international policy for generations to come. Together with our partners and alongside the farmers, ranchers, and forested landowners, we can achieve the shared vision of thriving rural economies and communities, as well as climate solutions. I want to thank you all for being here today. Sean, I'm going to turn it back to you to invite our panelists. But before I do, I just simply want to say this. Since 1981, America lost 437,300 farms. Since 1981, we've lost 141 million acres of land that was in farming that's no longer in farming. And last year was a record year in farm income. But the sad reality is that only 7.5% of farms, representing the largest farms, those who sell more than $500,000 in sales, they garnered 89% of that income, which meant that roughly 2 million American farms had to share 11%. The reason why this is important is because it provides an opportunity for those 2 million farm families to have the opportunity to stay in business, to do what they love to do, and to transfer it to the next generation, which is what every farmer wants to do. So it's incredibly important, that not only for the climate, but for the survival and thriving of rural communities and farm families that love farming, for us to figure out creative ways to improve income opportunities so that that single farming operation doesn't necessarily only have to depend on the sale of a commodity, but can get an ecosystem service market. It can sell its waste product and be converted into a variety of bioproducts. It can focus on local and regional food systems, and all of that can create multiple revenue streams for that farm family so that there's real opportunity for small and mid-sized producers. And so it's a win-win-win. And that's why this is so vitally important, and that's why the folks we're going to hear from will, I think, reinforce this message as I think, a more hopeful opportunity and a more hopeful model for days to come. This is Sean's first moderate event, so we're all going to be very, very understanding.
Thank you for that vote of confidence, sir. Yeah. Sincerely, though, thanks for setting the table in such a thoughtful way, because we are really pleased to be joined by three experts in this field who are doing incredible work, all in this notion of partnerships being key to driving these climate-smart outcomes that we're all seeking. So I want to do quick introductions of the three panelists, and then we'll get right into the discussion. So to my right, your left, Elizabeth Franis from American Forest Foundation, Director of Business Analysis. You've had several roles at the foundation, and in particular, and one I'll ask you to talk a little bit more about, is this Family Forest Carbon Program that is really a signature initiative at American Forest Foundation. So pleased to be joined by Elizabeth. Importantly, did I understand some early career work in Uganda, so some international experience as well. Pleased to have you. Carlos Suarez, Director of Sustainability at the U.S. Grains Council, also really happy to have you here. Host of different crops represented by your organization, but very key in many aspects of the work we're doing on partnerships. Previous work in your career, regional trade specialist in Latin America, also some time with the Nature Conservancy. So thanks for being with us. And then Meredith Ellis, rancher from Texas. Meredith, I want to make sure I get G-C Ranch. I want to make sure I didn't transpose the letters there. But also involved with several important organizations, the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance, the Integrity Beef Alliance, and perhaps most importantly, the manager and the owner of this ranch, which you run 200 cows over 3,000 acres, and also have some private forest land. So, welcome. Thanks for joining us. So I'm going to start right in with a handful of questions for our panel here, and we'll just see where the discussion takes us. Elizabeth, I mentioned the Family Forest Carbon Program that American Forest Foundation, along with TNC, actually has stood up that is geared, and I'll let you talk mostly about this, but really geared towards thinking about those small and in many cases underserved forest landowners that haven't always seen themselves in forests being a solution to climate change. We all subscribe to that notion, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your work with the foundation and particularly how you're working with some of those folks who haven't always been reached by the philanthropic community, by the NGO community, and even by the federal government.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. So we launched the Family Forest Carbon Program with the Nature Conservancy in 2020, started thinking about it a couple years earlier. And the time that we launched it, less than 1% of forest carbon projects were on these small family-owned forest land. And, this is due to several reasons. One of the biggest ones is cost. It is a lot of money if you're a small forest owner to actually engage in and start a forest carbon project. But as your question points out, these individuals and families are absolutely crucial for climate change mitigation. Families and individuals own 38% of the forest in the United States, the largest of any group of ownership. And what's more is that they actually produce over 50% of wood products in the United States as well. So these individuals and families are really the key to unlocking, nature-based solutions when it comes to forests in the United States. And to your point, these are not large landowners. These are landowners. Our average size of a landowner who is enrolled in our Family Forest Carbon Program is 150 acres. And we work with landowners a lot as small as 30 acres and sometimes even smaller. So these landowners, they tend to be people who haven't really worked with any sort of program like this before. 2/3 of them, they don't have forest management plans. A lot of them have never, had a woods walk with a professional forester. And so this is, oftentimes a barrier and an opportunity to participate in programs like this. But it's been amazing to reach people who have never had this opportunity, this connection, this professional advice, and help them along this journey. So I do want to touch on some barriers that we have had in working with these landowners and in giving them access to the carbon market, and how the USDA has worked with us and helped us to overcome these barriers. So first is technical. So you mentioned credibility, and credibility is a huge piece here, right? And how do we credibly calculate the carbon impact that these landowners are having at a cost that will enable more to participate? So we received a Conservation Innovation Grant from the USDA that has allowed us to create a new methodology for improved forest management, and not only does it enable small family landowners to participate, but it creates a new bar for accounting. So we are raising the credibility, raising the integrity, and allowing small family landowners to participate. The second is educational. This really refers back to what I was talking about before. We have to, and we love to spend a lot of time with landowners, walking the woods with them, teaching them about not only the opportunities in forest carbon, but also the opportunities in reaching their goals for biodiversity, for sustainable wood products. So talking to them about how all of these different goals that they have can integrate together and what this could mean for long-term management is very important. It's also expensive. So we were really grateful to receive a landscape scale restoration grant from the USDA that helped pilot this outreach and education concept in Pennsylvania. And we're also very excited about the Forest Landowner Support Program, which I think will really be helpful on this front for both us and other organizations that are having some of these similar goals. The third barrier that I wanted to mention is financial. We are asking landowners to change their behavior. A lot of times, families and individuals might think of their forests as, maybe a place where they can go to get some cash when needed. So think about if you have a medical bill, if your child is getting married and you need some cash, that's an opportunity. So we're helping and hoping that people will change their behavior and really think about investing in their forest as a long-term resource that helps to carry on through the generations. To change behavior, it costs money. So we offer incentives and to participate in the Family Forest Carbon Program, and carbon markets provide for this to some extent. But we're really excited about the idea that the USDA has had, that you should be able to also do that through the commodities that these landowners produce. That forest product companies or their customers will be willing to pay more for commodities that are produced with management techniques that sequester and store more carbon in our forests. So we received a Climate-Smart Commodities award from the USDA and are also a partner on a second award with the New England Forestry Foundation as our partner. This is a super ambitious program. It's trying to transform the way that we think about giving landowners the tools and resources that they need to transform the way that they manage their land and the way that they think about their land for generations. So this award has allowed us to both accelerate landowner engagement in these climate-friendly forestry practices and also build a robust accounting platform to translate these activities in the ways that companies that purchase wood products can actually find value and pass that value on to their customers as well. We really could not have done this without the support of the USDA. We're so grateful for the partnership, and they've helped us to develop the idea, pilot it, and then really bring it to the landowners. So with your help so far, we've enrolled 470 landowners, 70,000 acres, committed $17 million in payments to these small family and individual landowners, and enrolled enough property to generate 1.25 million tons of carbon mitigation over the next 20 years. We're just getting started. We're, again, so grateful and so excited for what's to come.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, not only for painting the picture of what type and sort of aspect of forest landowner you all are working with, but also just the multitude of programs that are out there, some at our department, some elsewhere, that can actually sort of feed into this effort. So we got some Inflation Reduction Act programs. The Secretary mentioned that, generational investment from Congress, but also traditional Farm Bill conservation programs, all of which can make some of this go from written down on a piece of paper in concept to actually helping someone on the ground. So very much appreciate all those sentiments. Carlos, I want to turn to you and pick up a little bit where Elizabeth left off on the credibility piece. So you've worked, a good chunk of your career talking about biofuels. And, there's been in the past some skepticism about the climate benefits overall in the sector. I think that in recent years, we've just seen a sea change when we talk about the carbon intensity and showing our math, if you will, on how the biofuels can not only play a role in our existing automobile fleet and lowering our carbon emissions there, but also exciting new opportunities like sustainable aviation fuel. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your work in that arena, and particularly on the credibility piece and what you all at the U.S. Grains Council are doing to bolster that.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you for the opportunity. For those of you in the audience who are listening to this, U.S. Grains Council, where we focus our work on, is engaging with international audiences and educating them about our products. So We are positioned in a very good place, and our day-to-day conversation is about explaining precisely this, the credibility in terms of the benefits associated to our products. And so in the agricultural space, I would say that corn, sorghum, and barley, which are the three products that the U.S. Grains Council represent, have been at the forefront in terms of measurement. So the biofuels program, which was, last decades or a little bit more, EVs of the time, its main value proposition was associated, clean energy, energy security, but there was a component of measurement within it. And there was a methodology developed even in the 90s, which is the GREED model, that pretty much underpinned the whole structure of the biofuels program. And so we have been measuring carbon intensity for decades now in the agricultural space. And a lot of the improvements that we have seen, because these are not touted, the ethanol from 2 decades ago is not the same ethanol that we have today. There have been considerable improvements in terms of the carbon intensity, and these have been measured. Measured not in a general or fantasized way. They've been measured scientifically. Oregon National Laboratory has been behind many robust studies that indicate that whereas our ethanol was reducing about 30-something% greenhouse gas emissions against gasoline back in the 90s, we're up to over 50%. And a lot of that improvement has had to do with an increased efficiency in refinery operations from the increased yield that our ethanol producers get. But beyond that, our farmers have also been implementing climate-smart practices that have been driving down the carbon intensity score of our product. And not only have they been doing that, with opportunities, with the incentives such as climate-smart partnerships, we now have a massive opportunity to continue to drive them down. And so we are talking about the possibility of even achieving net zero or negative carbon intensity scores for U.S. ethanol derived from corn, derived from sorghum, from various sources. And this opens up incredible opportunities for our farmers to precisely stay on the land. And here I would like to mention one of these opportunities, which is precisely the one associated to sustainable aviation fuel. The U.S. has been at the forefront in terms of developing technologies that will allow us to decarbonize a very hard-to-abate sector, and where we have at present the technology and the possibility of continuing to drive down those improvements at the farm that will unlock the market and the possibility, the opportunity that will provide revenue to the farms. But in order to materialize this, the markets have to be there and the credibility has to be there. And I feel that our industry sometimes, faces the challenge of what many other sectors sometimes face, and it's the fact that oftentimes science is not recognized, or the models that point to the fact that the benefits are there don't get acknowledged. And so sometimes methodologies go in the direction of using outdated data. And, having conversations about models and going into the formulas, it's no fun. We have to admit it. But it's an important component because that's what actually unlocks the market. So choosing the right models, choosing the right data, doing the verification, doing the accounting is something that our farmers have been doing, again, for over 2 decades, because that's how they had to comply, and that was the difference between just regular ethanol and then, the advanced ethanol. And so we're very familiar to this conversation, and we're seeing this now spread over to the food and feed side, where there's an amazing amount of alignment that needs to happen between what farmers are doing and the markets recognizing those activities. And again, Climate-Smart Partnerships, what it does is it brings up the appropriate incentives, it de-risks the implementation of some of these practices that are costly and then in some cases may not even pan out. And so it just creates this framework that really makes us very hopeful that both the incentives will continue to be there for the farmers, but also that the markets are created and that the appropriate methodologies are recognized so that we continue to thrive in this bioeconomy where we see a very bright future for producers.
Thank you, Carlos. And just to sort of drive home one point there, that the notion that we've got a whole host of folks along the value supply chain that have an opportunity here, if we can, as I said, make the math, show our math, make it pencil out, so we've got those revenue streams flowing to your members and your commodity producers. At the same time, we're making a difference for the climate. So thank you. Meredith, I want to turn to you next, and I just channel a little bit of what the Secretary said here at the top, that we don't at the department necessarily subscribe to this adage that in agriculture you need to get big or get out. In fact, there's a hope that a lot of the practices that we're talking about today can deliver additional revenue streams to producers that can help some of our smaller producers, some of our operations that aren't necessarily those 50,000 acre operations, stay on the land, participate, invest in their rural communities. So as one of those producers that maybe fits on that smaller edge of the scale here, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what the Partnerships for Climate-Smart Commodities grant has meant to your ranch, your family, the rural community that you live in. And walk us through that a little bit, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure. So my operation is big if it's in reference to the East Coast, and it's small if it's in reference to the West Coast. So our operation is in Texas. It's 3,000 acres of pristine grazing land. I grew up there and honestly took it for granted. My dad started it 40 years ago, and I really just took it for granted. I left. I went to the University of New Mexico, and I got my master's in landscape architecture, focusing on sustainability. And so I wanted to do good in the world. I wanted to do something that was impactful. And through my studies, I realized that the loss of our wilderness, the truncation of migratory passageways, the relentless, never-ending urban sprawl, and frankly, man's general disconnect from their food that they eat and the hands that grew it. And I realized that the most important thing I could do with my life is to not sell my ranch that I would inherit for millions of dollars, but rather go back home and continue my father's legacy. And so that's what I did. And my first order of business was to quantify our carbon footprint. I have a 9-year-old boy, and I do not want to do this if it is not good for his future. And so through partnership with the Ecosystem Services Market, the Foundation for Food and Ag Research, it was a lot of data that they required, but in the end, they estimated that our net greenhouse gas drawdown per year averaged 2,500 tons of CO2 every single year. So that's like taking 551 cars off the road. So every year that me, a small Texas producer, does what I do and am able to continue to do what I do, I am providing an enormous benefit to our entire globe. And I wanted to personally thank you from the bottom of my heart. I want to thank you for my 9-year-old little boy. I want to thank you for the 660 native species that call my landscape home. I want to thank you for my pristine watersheds. This opportunity that you have given my organization gives me all the hope in the world. It was 100% small producer developed and producer led. It was a major grassroots effort, and you saw merit in that. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. So our grant is extremely aggressive. in a nutshell, it seeks to instill transparency and traceability within the entire beef supply chain at scale. So, extrapolating upon the good data that our operation received, what if every ranch, every operation in the United States was incentivized and rewarded for and paid upon not just pounds of beef, but also these valuable ecosystem services? This not only helps the rancher adapt resiliency, in the face of climate change and fluctuating weather, but it helps us keep our land for the next generation intact. And I have all the hope in the world for it. One of the key benefits that our operation provides is that it's principle-based rather than practice-based, meaning that it empowers the small rancher to choose the right climate decisions on their operation that will have the most impact, the most bang for their buck. So not just for them, but for ranchers all over the U.S. It is my sincere hope that this grant will transform the United States beef industry so that the average consumer at the grocery store can choose to purchase beef from landscapes that are raised regeneratively and responsibly. So thank you.
Meredith, thank you very much for certainly sharing the components of what you all are doing, but more so just the personal story and what this means to you and your family and your 9-year-old son. I have an 8-year-old son. I feel that. So thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Secretary, I'm going to turn it over to you and certainly invite you to reflect on anything that we've heard thus far here, but also just to give us a sense of how are we going to make the efforts that we're pursuing today persist into the long term. We've got a very unique opportunity right now with an influx of investment from Congress, certainly from our NGO stakeholders and other partners, which is the topic of this conversation. But what's it going to take to make this work long run?
Well, first of all, let me say the folks who arranged the order of people to talk really screwed up here. Meredith, you should have been last. I should have been in the middle. Carlos, you need to calm down a little bit. First of all, thanks to the panel. This is incredibly informative. And my honest answer to your question, first and foremost, starts with having this panel and panels like this talk to the American public, talk to American producers, talk to consumer groups, talk to American business leaders, talk to environmental and conservation leaders, to suggest that this is a model in which we all can support. It's voluntary. It's incentive-based. It's driven by a market. It has environmental goals, and it has a very strict monitoring and measuring component. It provides America the opportunity to do what America does best, which is always be the one step ahead of in terms of innovation. Whether you're talking about sustainable aviation fuel, that's an industry that doesn't really exist today, for all intents and purposes. Ethanol industry is what, 15 billion gallons, give or take? We're talking about 36 billion gallon industry. We're talking about the jobs, the farm income. Enormous opportunity. So I think it's important, first and foremost, for us to communicate the opportunity side of this. And then secondly, I think we need to ask folks, are we okay as a country with losing 437,000 farms? Are we okay with that? Are we okay with 141 million acres of land that was being farmed that can't be farmed today because folks have left the rural places of our country and moved to urban centers that, by their very nature, have to expand? Are we okay with that? Are we okay that there has been a concentration of farm income and taking nothing away from production agriculture, important aspect of our agricultural industry, important to feed us and feed the world? But can't we also be smart enough to figure out a way in which small and mid-sized producers can have an opportunity to do what Meredith wants to do, which is not only to farm with principle, but to make sure that her son has an opportunity to do so as he grows up. So it takes education, it takes communication. I think it takes us asking the tough questions. It takes us understanding and appreciating that because profit margins are relatively thin in this business, because we have created a very efficient system, you've got to de-risk. You just can't ask a farmer who hasn't made money or has made very little money to spend more money in the hope that at some point in time they'll be paid. You've got to de-risk it. And then you have to create a market incentive. And in doing so, by creating that market incentive, you have to create more than just one opportunity for that farmer, that forested landowner, to be able to profit. They can profit from an ecosystem service market, but they can also profit from the use of agricultural forestry residue to convert into a sustainable aviation fuel. Or maybe as they're doing that, they can create a feed for a cattle industry down in Texas. They can reduce the carbon footprint, and maybe they qualify with that for ecosystem service markets. Maybe you allow that producer to also be engaged in processing so that they not only benefit from production but also processing, and that you create more competition and a more resilient food system at the same time. So what does it take? It takes all of that, and then it takes policymakers creating the tools and maintaining the tools to be able to provide the incentives, to be able to provide the market efforts and promotion opportunities. So what does that entail? It entails a farm bill that understands the significance and importance of this. Right now, we don't have a farm bill. It's already late. It's going to be later. Why is it late? Because we're discussing reference prices. Reference prices are prices that need to be adjusted in order for farmers who don't generate as much yield or profit as they thought they were, that they basically get a little bit of help. It helps a lot of farmers, but it helps the large-scale farming in a very significant way. That's the debate we're having now. Shouldn't we also be having a debate about how you create a structure that creates multiple revenue streams? Shouldn't we make sure that we maintain the local and regional food system opportunities that are currently available in the Farm Bill and maintain the funding for that? Shouldn't we also continue to maintain the funding for the Inflation Reduction Act and the conservation spending, as well as the renewable energy opportunities that can be created? Shouldn't we think about that? Understand the challenge that folks have with renewable energy and taking productive farmland out of production. But there are other opportunities. There are other opportunities for farmers to take renewable energy grants and pool their excess energy and sell it to their REC to lower their costs and the costs of their neighbors to provide greater economic opportunity for rural places. Now, for the Americans who are in this audience, this is not just about food security. It's not just about maintaining the opportunity for small and mid-sized farming operations to survive. It's not just about the important work on the climate, as important as all of that is. There's also a national security component to this. And you say, well, how can there be a national security component to this? It's more than food security. It's a disproportionate number of people who serve in the military come from rural America. So if you continue to have shrinking farm opportunities and farm families leaving and going into cities, you're shrinking the total population that's going to provide that disproportionate number into the military. So there are multiple reasons why this is important, right? And that's why having this conversation is important. And the last thing I would say, Sean, is that we've got to change the nature of this conversation. Look, I'm not discounting the significance of 1.5 degrees, climate change. Farmers, ranchers understand, forested landowners, they see it every day. we understand the challenge. We understand the risk. I think we also have to understand there's an opportunity side to this, and we need to seize that opportunity. We need to be a bit more hopeful about our ability to do great things and innovative things, to be able to have the trust and the faith in farmers and in grain farmers and in forested landowners to understand the opportunity here, to not only help themselves but help their community and their country and the world. So I'm really optimistic, and after you listen to this panel, you need to be optimistic. You have reason to be optimistic, because there are people out there that are embracing this future. There are people working very hard to make it happen, and I think we have the tools. We just need to make sure we maintain them, right? And make sure that we have the right set of conversations with the people of the country and the policymakers, and not be afraid of this, not be fearful of this future, but be hopeful about it and embrace it, because it is really optimistic. And I appreciate your kind words. And since you shared a personal story, let me finish with why I got into this business. I was raised in a city. As I have often said to audiences, if my father and mother, God bless their souls, were alive today and they knew I'd been the Secretary of Agriculture for the country not once but twice, they would have thought the country was in deep trouble. But I married a young woman from a small town in Iowa. We moved out to her hometown, and I started practicing law, and I represented farmers. And I represented farmers during a period of time when we saw foreclosures, and we saw farm families devastated. This was part of that get big or get out sequence. And what I learned from that experience was that unlike practicing law and being a lawyer, that tells you what a person does. It doesn't tell you who that person is. When you say you're a farmer or rancher, that tells me more than just what you do. It tells me who you are. And I unfortunately saw how devastating it was for farmers to lose that identity because they lost connection to the soil and to the land. And I decided that what I would try to do with my life was to try to create opportunities so that didn't have to happen. And so hearing your story today reinforces that we're headed in the right direction. We just need to continue it.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and for bringing in that human element to this, right? At the end of the day, we can have all of the greatest policies in the world coming out of Washington, D.C. or wherever. If it doesn't translate to actual people on the ground being interested and making these changes that, in our view, create more opportunity, none of this is going to work. So we just have a few minutes left, but I wonder if we could go down the line and ask each to talk just a little bit about how do those conversations go when we're in these partnerships with private forest landowners, with your members at the Grains Council, with your neighbors at the coffee shop, with your colleagues in the Integrity Beef Alliance, et cetera. How do we get folks to enroll in what we think are unique opportunities? But I've heard more times than I can count that this is, no offense to the West, but this is the Wild West when we think about carbon programs, when we think about sustainability programs. How do we help landowners who are interested but maybe skeptical, folks who are ready to jump in headlong? How do we get more folks enrolled? And could we talk a little bit about the experience there with our remaining time? Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Thank you. Great question. I love this question. I'm a data person, so I'm interested in actually understanding this. And I will say it's difficult. To your point, there is not, one program. There's a lot of programs, and it can be confusing. So it's all about time, patience, and listening, and building relationships with the folks on the ground. I mentioned this a little bit, but, we can't go in, we wouldn't want to go in and just say, hey, here's what we're doing, join us. The conversation is much more about, hey, what are your goals? Do you want to see this land passed down through generations? Do you want to see an income? Do you want to see, a rare bird? What does it look like for you? And then understanding, okay, given all of that, does this fit with what we're doing? Does it fit with another program? Let's get you connected with whatever is out there. A lot of times it is our program because we incorporate all of these things, but it's about understanding what are the goals, connecting that to the best opportunity for the landowners, and then finally really building that relationship. There are financial aspects, of course, but when it comes down to it, it's about listening and understanding, is that financial aspect what's going to be, the driving force? Is it, getting a forest management plan and getting that technical assistance? All of this to say, listening, walking on the ground with the landowner, and just paying attention to their needs and responding to that with our program design.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Carlos?
Thank you, Sean. So again, just referencing what Grains Council does, we start by asking our farmers what story they want us to tell internationally. And where they start by acknowledging what we're already doing. And this is something that even within the U.S., oftentimes folks don't know about. Just the structural foundations, the pillars of sustainability associated to conservation compliance. And so U.S. Grains Council just recently launched a sustainability program that, incorporates a document, incorporates a platform to, provide some level of traceability to the conservation compliance provisions that our producers are already bound by. And when you start by acknowledging what they're already doing, then the conversation becomes even more interesting because they are very open and willing to explore the possibilities of continuing to enhance their lands, but also to have their interlocutors be mindful of the costs and risks that these imply. And so a lot of the partnerships that subscribe to the USDA's program have these components embodied in them. So, for example, Illinois Corn has the Precision Conservation Management Program, which had approximately 400 farmers already enrolled, measuring the costs and the revenues associated to implementing climate-smart partnerships practices. And so with climate-smart partnerships, this is going to be expanding. And I was just so glad to hear that Field to Market was able to sign and get under contract last night, because speaking with Scott, the scope of the partnerships that exist already within our industry, and here I'm talking about producers, traders, the consumer goods companies. There's a lot of there's no shortage of appetite or interest for enrollment. You already see this in the conservation programs associated to the Farm Bill, which are, there's not enough resources for all the farmers that want to participate in them. And the same thing happened with Climate-Smart Partnerships. So we have hundreds of thousands of farmers willing to participate and take on the challenge of implementing these practices. But again, referencing from the previous questions, they need to make sure and understand that the market is there to recognize the challenges, the costs, the uncertainty associated to implementing these climate-smart practices.
Thanks, Carlos. Meredith.
Yeah, so I would most definitely echo my colleague's sentiment about including farmers and ranchers in a leadership role at all efforts. But I also wanted to highlight the importance of not overburdening farmers and ranchers, especially when it comes to data and MMRV. So for our Integrity Beef Legacy program, it was important that we didn't essentially create a second job for ranchers, but we still do have a very robust and aggressive data modeling and reporting system in place. So coming up with clever ways to pull that data on the back end, without having to give ranchers essentially a portfolio of paperwork to fill out, is something that I really would like to emphasize.
Mr. Secretary, any thoughts on this one?
Well, I think it's important for people, this issue of relationships, I think it's important for people to recognize that the Department of Agriculture understands and appreciates that there are some folks where we may have a hard time creating that relationship because of past activities from the department, past discrimination that may have taken place. So it was important for us to basically align ourselves with organizations and groups that had a trusting relationship already, so that they in turn could help us communicate the importance of these programs. And so we have over 100 contracts on the FSA side and well over 100 on the NRCS side of organizations and groups that are basically coming out and saying, here are the programs, let us help you guide you through the application process, which sometimes can be a bit difficult. And we're encouraging our teams to look at ways to simplify, to make sure that the burden of applying is not overburdensome. So I think that's an important component of this. And I think, the reaction that we're getting in the countryside is pretty significant. A record number of folks now getting conservation assistance because of additional resources. I wish we'd had enough money to do all of the projects that applied. We had 1,000 applications, so we could only fund 141. So it shows you that there's a desire and a demand for this. And the question is, to the last question you asked me, which is, well, how do we sustain this? Well, I think we sustain it, as I've indicated, by making sure that farmers express the need for continuation.
Thank you, sir. And, just a great way to wrap us up here, because the partnerships that the Department of Agriculture has undertaken over these last few years, whether it be the Partnerships for Climate-Smart Commodity Initiative, deploying those record generational investments from Congress and the Inflation Reduction Act, all of that investment is underlined by several key principles. We're going to keep things voluntary on private lands. It's always been our motto. It's going to be that. Incentive-based, flexible, and importantly, making sure that all producers can see themselves in these opportunities and these investments, not just the big row crop producer, corn, soybean rotation in the I states, which we love and continue to support, but also all commodities from all parts of the country, including producers that have historically not seen themselves in USDA programs. So I'm just incredibly excited, have been for a long time, but particularly after this panel here. So as the moderator of the first program at the U.S. Center today, one of the jobs is to keep us on time. We are out of time, but this conversation could go on all day. I want to please invite you all to join me in thanking the Secretary and our illustrious panelists for this outstanding event. Thank you.